Hi, I'm David Newsam, and this is Coffee Talk.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Perlak. I'm the chair of the guitar department. Welcome to another coffee talk with all of us here at Berkeley College of Music. We've got Cheryl Bailey here as usual. Hey, Cheryl.
Hey, everybody. Coffee cheers.
And our senior coordinator, Ian Steed, is also here. Hey, Ian.
Hey all.
And today our guest is Professor David Newsam. Hey, David.
Hey, everyone.
Nice mug.
I know. I
Yeah.
don't know where I can't remember where I got this, but yeah, it's good.
We have our guitar department coffee mugs for all of you who are listening. Today, this is the first coffee talk I'm doing from the guitar department office on Boylston Street, and Cheryl is also in the office today. So we're getting ready. We're getting ready to be back on campus more often. It's a good feeling. And David, welcome to the show, to being on Coffee Talk. But you're probably really getting ready to come back.
Well, I've been back since January. I started teaching one day on campus starting in January, and then this week I was back for the 12 week
Mhm.
for a full day as well. So
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah,
And how
it's
many
different,
years?
but
How
how
many years
many years?
have you been at Berkeley? Can you pull it up in your mind?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's like 32 now.
Yeah.
Started, yeah, in 1989.
Yeah. So you've seen a lot of changes that you'll talk about, I'm sure, as we go through this hang. The first
Definitely.
thing everybody wants to know is, do you drink coffee and how do you take it?
I did drink a lot of coffee in college, um, but then I became a tea drinker.
Mhm.
So
It's
I do have a
okay. Yeah.
I do have a coffee story though. So you all know that my daughter during the lockdown she went up to Maine to kind of escape. She was living in Massachusetts, moved up to Owl's Head, Maine to stay in her mom's cottage and ended up buying the Owl's Head General Store. Um, Talk about a change of career in the middle of its pandemic. So very proud of her. But I will say that there's a wonderful coffee shop in Rockland, Maine, the Rock City Coffee. It's right on Main Street in Rockland, Maine. It's a great co-op, and they have a special Owl's Head blend designed specifically for the Owl's Head General Store. So I ground these up for my wife. She's a big coffee drinker. So, but yeah, so you can order it online, or when you're up in Mid-Coast Maine on summer vacation, you can stop at the Owl's Head store and pick up their special blend. It's a dark blend, and it's really great.
That's really cool. I love that story about your daughter. It's one of my favorite things that happened in the pandemic.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, me too. I mean, it's just so many, stories about, hardship and everything. And she, just she was 26 at the time, and she had a lot of experience. She'd been working in restaurants since she was 16, and just she saw this store that had been empty for about 3.5, 4 years, which was kind of the lifeblood of this little town. The town itself, the full-time residents are 1,600, so it's this
mhm.
tiny little town. It's just a fishing town on the coast of Maine, and the town was kind of, longing for the general store because that was their hub, their community center, and so she talked to her mom about it, and she was saying how, it's such a shame that, the store's closed, and, I wish somebody would take it over. It really needs somebody that can work hard and knows the business. And she paused and said, "Wait a minute, is that me?" And her mom said, "Yeah, it is you." So she did it. She went for it and she bought it and she completely renovated. And they've been open since October and they're doing great. And now she's gearing up for the big summer rush she had, since October to kind of learn the ins and outs of running the business. And now it's going to be, tourist season where the town is going to go from like 1,600 to 16,000,
Wow. I mean, I think that's really interesting because so many of the students had to learn to adapt. And that's such a great story of someone who
We all did.
really adapted. Yeah,
I
and I
mean,
was thinking that, I mean, you've been here for 30 plus years, and then you had to change everything about the way you taught really in about a week. We had about a turnaround time of about a week. And
right.
I'm wondering, like, is there something specific you can put your finger on now that you feel like you learned from that, or something that maybe had prepared you to do that would be
Well, I
helpful?
mean, I was fortunate that I've been doing Berkeley online since about 2014. I designed a course, I think, in the end of 2013
Mhm.
that ran in the spring term of 2014. So I
Mhm.
had that online experience teaching privately as well as teaching the course that I designed, you know.
Mhm.
So that definitely helped a lot, but there was still a lot of adjustments in terms of uh, teaching a live class,
Mhm.
because the online school, it's all pre-recorded. And so, I had, weekly meetings, but it was not actually, teaching an
Yeah.
entire course online. And especially teaching, labs and ensembles. That was the biggest adjustment, I think.
Mhm.
So I wish I had more, preparation in that end of things in terms of recording and video and sound editing and things like that. So I mean, I've learned some of that over the the last 14 months, but I think that would have definitely helped prepare me more for that quick adjustment that we made
Mhm.
last March.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, but there over the years, you've written so much curriculum, you've worked with so many different students. You've you really span quite a few styles in your teaching. So even just that ability to transition in the old way of doing things, quote unquote, must have helped you kind of
Yeah, I mean,
apply
I think that's, one of the benefits of being old and
that.
having taught as many students as I have. But yeah, no, I was mentioning to Cheryl earlier that I teach a course at the college called the Private Studio Teacher, where we talk about teaching, and I feel like, after 30 plus years, I have a little bit of knowledge and experience about the subject. So certainly, you use that all the time when teaching in every situation. I still find that I really try to work hard at perfecting the art of teaching. That it's I think a lot of people that take that course just think like, oh yeah, I'll just do it, and it's like, no, 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 no. Just because you might be a monster player and a really good person doesn't necessarily mean that that's all going to translate to being a good teacher. So and in some ways I reflect back on the early days that I did taught and think, wow, man, it couldn't have been that good for students. And I mean, I'll reconnect with students and get positive feedback, but I still feel like the place where I'm at as a teacher now is so far beyond where it was when I started back then. So but I really try to keep working on that craft of improving teaching every single lesson that I teach.
David, don't you think that's so similar to how we develop as players too? Because over the years, you get presented with students with so many different perspectives, and not no one learns the same way, and so you have to kind of go through so many possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one area where you can draw analogies, like, okay, you work really hard in this way to be a better player. Now just apply that to teaching. And the other thing that I tell the students, and the thing that I think about all the time, is that I've studied with some of the best teachers in the world, so I can draw an incredible amount of information and knowledge from their approach and the way that they taught and the way that maybe they dealt with my struggles. I had an opportunity through a grant at Berkeley to study with Grisha Goryachev and study flamenco before I wrote the flamenco course. And I was blown away by, just, the fact that he's probably one of the best flamenco players on the planet, but also what an incredible teacher he was. And when I reached points where I was struggling, how he would always be able to kind of find a way in to explain it. in a different way, but a way that made sense, And so I really admired, him and, having studied with Bill Levitt and Charlie Banakis and, some of the best, you know, educators, that walk the face of the earth. So, I mean, I definitely use that as inspiration as well as just a model for how I could become a better teacher as well.
I think what's interesting about what you just said is about how when you're a student and you really are thinking about the way someone is teaching you, you almost listen to them differently. Because a lot of people think, oh, I've taken lessons, so I could teach lessons. But are you really, really thinking about the way that someone breaks something down and explains it to you?
Right, right. And that's actually the first assignment in that course is to write about your experiences and then break down, why those teachers were so successful. What about their approach was the thing that connected or inspired you as a student? Because it's at that moment within the course where we start to turn the tables. Like, okay, you were a student, now you're going to become a teacher. And so, yeah, turning it around like that, like how did you respond? But then how would you, initiate those types of strategies yourself as an educator?
I think that's a really interesting thing, like for all the students who are listening. If you went into your next class or your next lesson and you approached it like part of my goal here is to think about the way this person is showing me this information, and then how would I be able to, could I go and then break it down for someone else? It will make you a different student. It will make you a better student if
Hmm.
you have to then explain the way that you do things.
Oh, absolutely. That's a big part of the class, not just doing the teaching, but really
Mhm.
understanding everything from, the lesson plan to the materials that you develop and then analyzing it after it's done, the kind of Monday
Mhm.
morning quarterback approach to like, how did this really go?
Right. And all the things you take for granted. So, I followed in your footsteps, David, as a faculty member at National Guitar Workshop, because you were there for many years. And then I came after. And one of the things I did was I taught some of the intern program, which is similar to your class that you're talking about, where
Hmm.
you're teaching people
Exactly.
to teach. And so the first day, I had a student sit down in the chair, and another student gave that person a guitar. And I said, you have to show them how to hold it, but you can't touch them. Because in so many of the classrooms, you can't touch the students. You can't just move their arms around. So they can only do what you tell them. And you think, how hard is it, to hold a guitar? And people
Right.
are upside down. Their hands are like all turned around. And then you think like, wait. And then the next thing is, okay, we're going to talk about a major scale, the definition of a major scale. And everybody can only repeat back to you what you say. And then, how do you explain that? Right?
Hmm.
How do you, and then you end up using terms that you haven't defined. You end up
Right.
saying things that
Exactly.
aren't clear. And then you
Hmm.
realize, oh my goodness, like in the beginning,
It's
you
hard.
almost have
Yeah.
to script yourself, and then
Right.
it
Well,
becomes natural, right?
well, I do a thing in the class where they have the first lesson that they have to teach is on like an everyday activity. So I'll assign them. You have to teach a lesson on how to brush your teeth, or how to iron a shirt, or how to make a sandwich. And again, it's things that you don't think about, but then you have to kind of design a plan and have the language to communicate it to somebody who's never done that before. Again, the assumption being that this person has never brushed their teeth before, so you have to teach them how to do it. Every stroke, every movement, every action is going to be the way that you teach it.
Yeah, that's really amazing. That's great. I really, hopefully everyone takes that class. We can't require it, but it would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, Ian took it. He could talk to the class and how much it's influenced him and how well he brushes his teeth, I guess.
I actually I thought about that class a lot ever since I took it. It was really good. I mean, you think you know something. I mean, I'm sure everybody's been in this sort of experience where you have a whole conception in your mind, logically laid out and reasoned well, and you think of all the reasons why, and then when you start to say it, you realize, oh my God. Halfway through the sentence, you think, holy crap, I'm using this one word way too often, and I am not nearly as clear as I thought I was. So yeah, I mean, it was really good. I thought about that class a lot. I remember that assignment, but I don't remember what I did.
I was
But
going to ask if you knew. Mhm.
that's such a good exercise.
Yeah, it's funny when Toki came in for his very first like week, he sat in on that class and I made him do the assignment too. I can't remember what he did, but it was really great, you know, that he participated, but then, you know, to put him in that same place that everybody's in, it doesn't matter, you know, how much experience you have. If you've never taught that lesson before, you still have to come up with a strategy for how you're going to, you know, teach it, you know. And it was really interesting to hear, you know, how he approached things and just to watch the process, you know.
Yeah, I think it's especially interesting because any of these things are something you just take for granted, right? You're not analyzing them. But a lot of people are like that about their guitar playing, or students. They haven't gotten to that place where they really are aware of what they do. Or, you know, for instance, if they have things going on with their technique that might be out of alignment or whatever, maybe that's the first time they even thought about that. Like, wow,
Right.
okay, holding the
Uh,
guitar. Wait, do I even know how
mhm.
to hold the guitar? You know?
Right, right. And it's all encompassing, you know, and that's why I find like one of the areas where I've really changed a lot of my teaching is just asking more questions, you know. Not so much because I don't think they know the answer, but it's important for me to hear how they, you know, answer it. And I'll ask them to explain it as if they were teaching it to somebody else as a way to really figure out if they truly get when they shake their head and said, "Yeah, I get it." I want to hear them like explain it and process it and then be able to really do it before I'm convinced that they know that you know they've understood the concept, you know. So
You know, to that point, I think that as I became a better teacher, I definitely became a better player. There's no doubt, because when you have to break something down, then you think, well, how do I do that?
right, or am I doing that, you know,
Am I
start
doing?
questioning, you
Yes.
know, am I really walking the walk, or am I just
Hmm.
telling everybody else the way to do things and then I'm ignoring my own deficiencies, you know.
Or with some things, I think, like, you know, David, you and I both study classical guitar coming up, and there are some hard and fast rules when you're starting about your technique because you don't want to hurt yourself. So you can never do certain things. Certain fingers plant on the strings and other ones don't at these times. And, you know, I found myself later when I wanted to do things like play slide and do other things, I would think, oh, you can't do that with your right hand. You can't put this. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. Can you? I mean, is it just like those training wheels that you had on so that you didn't cause an injury when you were 15? Like, well, what about 20 years later or a little while later? Like maybe you just kind of assume that the same things are true. Maybe you have to update your own files in
Hmm.
what's possible. And I think that that's good. And teaching helps because you're asking someone else to update their files. And so now you have to update your own, right? So,
Right. Yeah, and just to clarify, I didn't come up as a classical player. It was funny. I
mm,
had this discussion with somebody just yesterday. I mean, I grew up with like Jimi Hendrix and
mhm,
you know Johnny Winter and you know
mhm,
bands like that. And I was lucky. I did when I started to get more serious about the guitar. I did study with a great guitarist from Atlanta named Bob Shaw,
mhm.
who was actually in the service band, just like Larry Bayonne, you know. And so he really got me kind of more centered in terms of both my physical playing as well as just my understanding of kind of jazz and theory and you know harmony and things like that. So I was really lucky that he really got me ready and prepared to enter as a Berkeley student. But I didn't really start studying the actual classical guitar until like after my junior year of Berkeley. I mean, the curriculum at Berkeley at the time, talk about changes, was all pick style, you know? I mean, that was Bill Levitt's thing. It's pick style guitar, you know, kind of his like counter conservatory approach to developing a guitar department, you know? And, but he really placed an emphasis on learning classical repertoire. So I was playing all kinds of classical repertoire with the pick on my 175. which was crazy to think about now, but it really was a great discipline in terms of, applying that technique to really challenging repertoire and having to deal with all the mechanics and as well as the musical considerations. Um, but I fell in love with the music itself, and that's what really, spurred me to want to start studying the actual classical guitar and learning some of those techniques. So I was definitely a late bloomer when it came to studying classical, And then I went on later and got my master's and had a chance to kind of focus in on, you know, really focus in on learning the classical guitar.
That's a great story. When someone, there's the kind of a myth maybe that it dispels too, and in a way that you assume that if someone is a great classical guitarist because of the demands of that style, you must have started really young. And I think it's really nice to hear that, there's an element of just sort of falling in love with something and pursuing it that transcends that. And there are other examples of that too that would surprise people, I think, if they
Yeah,
hear
I
all the
was going to say,
stories,
I think of a lot of the people
a
that
lot of
I
people.
know who I consider to be great
Hmm.
classical guitarists, and I don't consider myself in that category, but other great classical guitarists. Um, a lot of them did start out on electric guitar, and at some point make the switch. I mean, I think I remember sitting down at lunch with some of the guests that came to Berkeley and hearing stories of, them starting out playing electric guitar as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that takes us really nicely to a question we always ask, which is about Berkeley first days. So you were a student here, and
Oh
you're
yeah,
a
I've got a
faculty
good
member.
story.
Would you share one with us?
Yeah, well, my story is really crazy. So anyways, yeah, there was a gap between the time that I graduated and the time that I got hired, but I was still living in the area. So, and I was really good friends with Bill Levitt and Larry Bayonne. I had had the chance to study with both of them, and it was right when Larry kind of took over and became the chair um, at that time. So I would always just pop in, say hello, stay in touch. Uh, and I should tell my first day at Berkeley story first, because the day that I came in and did my entrance audition, Larry Bayonne did the audition, and he's like sitting behind this desk, with his big guitar, and says, "Where are you from, kid?" And I said, "Enfield, Connecticut." And he said, "Oh yeah, me too." And I thought he was joking. I thought he was just like, trying to be a wise guy, which of course he is, um, but so it turns out we grew up in the same town. So I felt like we had this instant kind of bond. And then I had a chance to study with him my last 2 years at Berkeley, and then we stayed in touch after I graduated. So um, the first union contract was signed in 1986, and it was a 3-year contract. So in the fall of 1989 they renegotiated that contract, and they lowered the number of teaching hours that the teachers were required to teach. So they realized they had more students than they had teachers that could teach. So uh, it was the first week of class. I got a call on Tuesday, interviewed with Ron Bentley on Wednesday, and then started my first teaching day on Friday.
Wow, talking about jumping in
Yeah,
and
so there
learning
was
on the
no
fly.
like, I think I'll develop this or, figure out this. It was literally like, okay, here you go. Here's reading lab one, reading lab two, and these private lessons. Go. Now,
That's awesome.
fortunately, the curriculum was kind of still the same as what I had taken as a student. So I knew that material. It was all Bill Levitt's material and the classes and labs that I had taken when I was a student there. So that part was easy, to at least know what to begin to teach, and kind of what the expectations were. But yeah, it was just like a blur that first year or so, just because it was like, oh, I'm on the faculty of Berkeley. I just had gone from like teaching National Guitar Summer Workshop to basically getting home that summer and then basically walking in as a faculty member. And it was a trip for me just because, I'm now teaching next to the people that I had studied with for all those years. And I remember Mark French. I don't you probably don't know Mark French, but he was one of my teachers. And he saw me in the hall and he was like, "Oh yeah, I remember you. You were that guy that used to hide behind the music stand so I wouldn't call on you in class." I was like, "Yeah, that's pretty much me." I was like, "Oh God, please don't call on me."
So, Cheryl, were you a Berkeley student when David started teaching at Berkeley?
Yeah, I was here. Well, I was on my way out. I was 85 to 88 when I was a student.
Oh, I started in the fall of '89, so I just missed.
Okay, yeah, okay, all
Yeah,
right.
missed seeing.
But a lot of those same cats were on the faculty. I mean, I know. I didn't never study with Mark, but there's always the legends of all those
Oh,
folks.
I've got some stories that we'll tell off air. Mark and Wayne Clifton is an important part of my story as well because he was the classical guitar teacher at that time, and then he retired. And so after years of not having classical guitar courses, I approached Larry and said, "Hey, could I teach a classical guitar class?" And so they took that ensemble, which had been kind of left dormant for many years, and they brought it back. And so that was the kind of this, the big rebirth of kind of that classical guitar program at the college because they didn't have anything prior to that.
So, David, that was kind of my next question. It was about as you came and you started to develop as a faculty member, and parallel to that, you're developing your own playing and musicianship. What were some of the things that you started to work on and get excited about that you wanted to bring over into the curriculum and like because you do quite a bit of
Well,
different.
I think that's something we all do as faculty, and that's the great thing about this department is that, if you do have this new area of interest or a specialization or something, the administration, you and Cheryl and Larry and Rick in the past, and have been so open to just letting us, develop that into a course and just put it into the curriculum, and it's great. I mean the amount of concepts and styles and techniques that people can study in this department is just you know an amazing testament to the history of the department and what it has to offer. And so that definitely happened with me. It happened early on with that wanting to bring the classical guitar program back online, and then more recently with the flamenco course that I developed. It's turned into a really great course. I've had all kinds of students take that class from strict classical players like Drew is taking that class now, and amazing classical player, just you know but it's a new concept for him to try these flamenco concepts, and then it'll be like songwriters as well, electric guitar players that just really are interested in the style. So that's been really exciting, and so it certainly has been a big part of my history at Berkeley is just my own areas of interest becoming something that I teach both in private lessons and within the curriculum. So
Yeah, that's great. Hey Cheryl, what's on your mind right now as well?
You're gonna
So
think,
she
many things.
always asks that with
I
such like
do.
I know, but you're gonna
such
laugh
mystery
at
and
the question. I'm curious about your fingernails. I was gonna take your class. What am I gonna do?
yeah, it could be done. I mean, what I say is, it's not necessary. There are certainly plenty of great classical players that play with flesh, and don't use nails. Um, but it just offers a lot more tonal options, and certainly for flamenco, a lot more kind of dynamic, options if you do have the nails. But it's not necessary, it's not a requirement. But
And I've a question. I'm gonna show my ignorance here. Actually, it's this hand that I need to grow the nails on, or do like Kim that I glue on my fingernails.
yeah, yeah, I
But
always tell about Kim's ping pong balls. I don't know if I ever told you my ping pong ball story. I
No,
I
you
worked
didn't.
with this singer once, a soprano, and we did the Defia songs, And at the beginning of the rehearsals, I had told her about the ping pong ball. So after the concert, she gave me a little gift bag, and it had some nice little things in there. And at the bottom were these golf balls, and I'm like, Jenny, why did you get me golf balls? And she said, for your nails. And I said, not golf balls, ping pong balls. What do you want me to do with golf balls?
That would be like you could make some percussive
Yeah,
sounds with them. That's
yeah,
funny.
that
That's
was pretty
really
funny.
great.
So
That's really
anyway,
great.
Cheryl, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
No,
get
no, no. But
distracted.
in flamenco, I mean, I just took such, very basics of classical guitar as a teenager. And then for a minute, there was a classical, I lived in Baltimore near Peabody, and I went to see this, and I just was like, okay, I got to do that. And then I saw that I would have the way I wanted to do it, just the way my mind works is I would just have to work so hard, like I was so dedicated to try to work on picking, right? Just with a pick. So I said, it's kind of like all or nothing. But it's true. Like actually use your pinky in flamenco, but not in classical, right?
Correct.
So you use that as when you in
Just
the
for strumming. Yeah,
in the
just in the
strumming.
Raschiato stuff. So,
Okay.
just that stroke in that way. So, and that's what I tell the students is that, the thing, even if you're an amazing fingerstyle player, you never do this. It's always this. It's like, only going to the gym and doing, pull-ups and never doing, anything where you push out. So it's really learning that technique. And yeah, the pinky is used, but it's only in that kind of Raschiato kind of approach where you're playing out and strumming down.
What's really nice about it, though, I found just from doing it in a basic way, was when you do that, when you strengthen your extensor muscles like that, it
Hmm.
really does help your
Oh
flexor.
yeah,
It
it
really helps
totally
your
strengthens
scales.
your hand. Yeah,
Makes your
everything gets
arpeggios
improved.
faster. Yep.
Hmm.
It's really great
And it's
stuff.
funny, yeah. I tell the students, you just have to do this all the time, and they'll come in and they'll tell me, yeah, I sat in my class and I played on a book for the whole class, or I play on my lap, or I play on the dashboard of my car. It's just like, well, that's what you have to do. It's just developing the muscles so you gain that strength. But yeah, it'll inversely really help and improve your normal kind of fingerstyle technique.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I always did it. I had a teacher that showed me that, even for all
Hmm.
the arpeggios and the patterns, the classical stuff, the coming in and the tremolo,
Right.
everything
Well,
bringing in.
I use the Iznaiola
Hmm.
technique book, and even in his book he has that just as an exercise. I remember
Yep.
showing that to Grisha, and he's like, this is not flamenco. I said, I know, but it's basically just a book on mechanics.
Right. And all off the guitar, like all that stuff off the guitar, just so that
Hmm.
you get the muscles going, and then
Exactly.
it gets in there. It's like
Hmm.
running or walking or driving. It's in your muscle memory. That's really cool, David. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, it really shows, like, in the way that we do the curriculum in the guitar department, that you can take something like flamenco and you can really get into it and learn it in a lab, but then the benefits of it really, they are that thing, but then they also exceed that thing. And you'll find all these benefits maybe you didn't see in other areas.
Right, right. And I mean, I teach that course, going back to what Cheryl said, I teach that course like this is just, an introduction to this music and these techniques.
Mhm.
You know, 99.9% of the students are not going to become flamenco players, but they're going to basically take that, put it in their toolbox and figure out other ways that it could maybe benefit them or become part of their writing or their playing. And so we'll look at like some of the solo acoustic players. There's a lot of those candy rap players that use amazing techniques in both hands, and some of that is Raschiato. So even if it's just like, okay, I'm going to compose and use this technique, or I'm going to try to play, this song by Daniel Padim or one of those other artists that use those techniques, it's like now you'll have a better basis for what's happening mechanically, and not just like flailing your hands and hoping that you get it right.
So, David, what about all this stuff? Are there things that you developed as a teacher, like seeing needs and seeing opportunities for things that influenced the things you're working on as a player? And I'm asking because I just feel like you're a very excited player. Like you're always into something. I follow you on
Excitable
Facebook.
boy.
Yeah, you're like, like you play jazz guitar. You're in several different ensembles that you lead in different styles. You have extended range, like you bring in these guitars with 10 strings and 8 strings and 7 strings. And I think we
That's
said
an
at one time,
addiction. That's
you
not.
have more strings than any other person in the guitar department in your home. And, but I think it's really cool that your professional life as a performer is very stylistically diverse, and yet I'm sure in you find all the connection points in yourself in your practicing. So
Well, I mean, I joke that I'm a Gemini, so that it's kind of like, you know, the whole idea of doing both nylon strings and electric guitar.
mhm,
I consider it kind of unique. I mean, I don't think
mhm.
there are that many players that feel like they have, you know, 2 feet in both worlds. Um, so, but they're very different, you know. I mean, I feel like the nylon world, it's a lot about the technique and studying, you know, to maintain a high level of proficiency on the technique. And in the electric world, it's much more about the concepts, you know. So, like Julian teaches a course on, you know, applying the proficiency material to real life music, and that's really what I try to do with students. And then, like you said, that carries over into the way that I approach things. Like, okay, let's really learn your melodic minor modes. Let's learn, you know, chord substitution from that scale, and let's apply it to a tune. Let's play Stella by Starlight and play only, you know, major 7 sharp 5 chords, you know. And so now all of a sudden it's like, okay, I have to know melodic minor, I have to know the harmony of melodic minor, and now I have to be able to like apply it to an actual song and do it in a very specific way, a very kind of like, you know, limited parameter type of way, you know. And so that's, you know, find myself working on, and then how I convey those ideas to students, you know, to try to develop those points and get them to the place where they feel like they understand and can play it and can make music out of it.
So Ian, this kind of sounds like the right time for you to jump in and ask your question or whatever is on your mind.
Yeah. So here's something we ask everybody who comes on to Coffee Talk, which is what's something that students like a question that they should ask or something that they should be thinking about that they might not think to even ask, like something that might not even be on their radar that they should be aware of.
Hmm, that's a good question. I wish I had had this one in advance. What should they ask that they don't even think about? I don't know. That's hard for me to answer off the top of my head. But I guess, you know, one thing I noticed, like teaching, I had probably half a dozen first semester students on Monday, you know, and man, some of them were incredible players, you know, but it the nature of learning guitar these days is so different than when we were coming up, you know. I mean, I had a chance to study with a great teacher and learn concepts and, you know, interact, and they learn from videos, you know. And so those questions that I asked them were all about, do you understand what you're actually playing, you know? So I guess the question that I would say is, you know, help me understand what I'm doing, you know, help me get into what's actually happening within the music, you know? So, I mean, I saw somebody play a great version of Black Orpheus that they learned from Louis Bonfa, and then somebody else played, um, I think, an arrangement of Don't Know Why, you know, or some other, you know, Pat Metheny arrangement, you know. And then I said, okay, well, let's play the song. And they were like, what do you mean? It's like, well, let's play Black Orpheus. You play the chords, I'll play the melody, or you play the melody, I'll play the chords. And they, you know, they weren't able to do that. So it's just, I mean, you know, it's hard. Obviously, we haven't been able to play with other musicians, but I think just in general, people are so tuned into, working on this one thing that maybe they kind of miss the bigger picture. Like, and it happened to me too. I remember working on Bill Levitt's arrangement of "Fly Me to the Moon," like in my first or second semester. And I think that summer after my first year, I was at a family gathering and I was playing that arrangement. All of a sudden, my uncle started singing. I'm like, wait a minute, how do you know that song? And he's like, what do you mean? It's Frank Sinatra. Everybody knows that song. And it was a real lesson for me at that moment. Like, I don't know this song. I know the arrangement, you know. But so it really again influences the way that I teach, especially because I see so many solo like fingerstyle players. I want them to go beyond just kind of the notes, and have a bigger understanding of the composition and what makes up, the melody and the harmony and how it all fits together, and then how to do it, themselves ultimately. I had a student this morning, one of my online students, say, I have 10 chord solos I know, he said, so at a minute and a half I have about 15 minutes of repertoire. And I'm like, yeah, right. And so I said, okay, so let's work on just learning how to be a solo player. Take those songs, right? Take, you know Prelude to a Kiss by, William Levitt's arrangement, and let's work on the Duke Ellington song, and then maybe we can improvise a chord solo for a couple choruses, and now you have 5 minutes, and now your 10 songs are a whole set of solo playing. And so I think that's the one area, just, and again, it's not so much a question, Ian, it's just I want students to kind of like look at the bigger picture of, what makes up these different, you know transcriptions that they're working on, and how they can be basically get to the point where they can do that. How could I do that? That's the answer to that's the question they should ask. How can I do this?
I'm really taken by something you mentioned when you said, they're not learning necessarily a lot of the ways that we used to. Now they're learning through videos. And I think it's an interesting development when there was a generational thing, when people started learning from records, right? And before, when somebody would learn from somebody in their community or from somebody that they knew, and they just started picking things up from records, and then you had all these self-taught musicians who were playing cool things, and
Well, I think that
on
always existed. I don't know, maybe Cheryl can talk to this too. I mean, I feel like people have always kind of learned from records, maybe even before the community thing, but I don't know, maybe just because so much of the video is like tutorials, it's like people teaching, and maybe they're not as credentialed as, some of the folks in the Berkeley guitar department, or, you know, or maybe have different ideas about how to approach things, and learning things. So,
Yeah, well, I think there's always that thing, that sometimes they call the guitar the people's instrument. There's an accessibility to it that invites everyone in to a certain level, maybe a superficial level, or hey, I can, yeah, I can play this as I learned it, but that the thing that we're doing and what you're doing is now let's take that deeper. And also, just the history, some maybe, people get caught up in, if they're a younger person, maybe thinking all that's happening is happening right now. When you're talking about, well, yeah, well, Duke Ellington, or we go back to Bach, or we go back to, the Renaissance, or whatever. I mean, there's a whole history of music that you need to sink your teeth into. So I guess, on one level, there are lots of people out there that can play the guitar, and
right.
it's fine, like playing that arrangement just as you learned it. But to go deeper is the challenge, and having someone like you there to guide a student in there and see how, wow, how many dimensions there are to anything, any piece of scale, a chord, a piece, a piece that you're working on.
Right, right. And maybe going back to Kim's original question about the, kind of first days, I think that's something that's really changed, through my tenure at Berkeley. It's just, I remember like teaching really high level students early on and being like so insecure. Like, what am I going to show this person? They sound so amazing, And sometimes Jim Kelly would do like go off to Italy and do the Umbria Jazz Festival, and I would sub for him. And he had like all the really high level students that had heard him at Italy, festivals and come to Berkeley to study with him, And I always felt insecure, and now I feel like because of the way that I approach things, I feel like I could show anybody something or make some comment or maybe highlight one thing that they hadn't thought about, And so that's kind of what I try to do. If I'm listening to somebody for the first time, I'm trying to find that place where maybe they're not thinking about something in a certain way, or maybe they're, it could be a technical thing. But I never feel like that insecurity anymore. I feel like, no matter who it was, if Pat Metheny came in, I'd be like, yeah, you could work on that squeak. Your sound is kind of noisy, I joke. I'm just.
I think that's true though, and I think in some ways, the more experienced you are, the more you realize you do want to learn from people about different things. It always strikes me like you meet people who you idolized, and they're like, "Hey, what do you do? Oh, you do that? Okay, listen, you play class. I have a problem with this finger, and like, how do you get that tone to be fatter?" And because we're all trying to get better all the time,
Right, right. Well, I heard you
right?
talking about, your conversation with Jimmy Page. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like
that's
that's
right.
just amazing,
Yeah, that's right. Like he was so thrilled. He was like, "Oh, I can't. I'm so glad to meet you. Listen, my A finger's giving me a hard time, and
Hmm.
like, how do I get that melody to come out?" And this is all. And we're playing guitar in our arm because we're at this dinner thing, and and it was so great, right? And of course, like it was funny because it was a piece that he wrote, a piece of music that he wrote that made me have to study classical guitar so that I could learn to bring out that melody better. And then, all these years later, I'm with him at
Talking
dinner,
about it.
like telling him, no, 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 work on your A finger. That's going to be the way to go. It was
I
really
know.
good. It's, it's so fun. And David, I was talking to an incoming student today, and we were talking about the proficiency materials, right? And he was asking me what they are,
Mm.
all of the vocabulary that everyone goes through every semester at Berkeley, and you get tested on it. And it's basically your modes and your triads and your four-part chords and arpeggios. And I was telling him, well, all the styles of music that you love, all these different styles are made of the same stuff. And so if you know all these materials really deeply, and then you pick the styles you love, and as you and Cheryl are saying, you get really into like what makes that authentic, what makes blues sound like blues, what makes this kind of blues sound like itself versus this other style. It's all the way you use the stuff. And so if you already know the stuff, then it's like, oh, well, I'm really just studying the authenticities and the nuances and the history, but I've got all my modes in hand. I've got all my
Right.
triads. I know where I am on the fretboard. And, most of what you're talking about, which we've all experienced, is when you run into a wall, it's because you don't know the materials. You only know them in a certain context. You can't take them out of context and use them somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I remember there was a recent post on Facebook, about the proficiency materials. I forget it was like the cycles or something like that, and people started like piling on and complaining. I'm like, all of that stuff is just learning your instrument. Why would you not want to learn the instrument in any way? All different ideas and concepts, but just learn the instrument so there are no limitations. And I feel like that's what this curriculum does. 8
Right.
semesters of this curriculum, there's no you know gaps in terms of what you should be able to do, because all that knowledge is there, that foundation is there.
Yeah, that's fun. It's a funny thing to complain about too, like voice leading. Like, oh, I don't want to learn how to voice lead on the instrument. Like, that's if there's one thing that all styles make you do, if you cannot voice lead well, you will not be successful. That would be the one thing.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think,
I mean, it's something I talk about all the time. This morning I was teaching a lesson to a student that's doing a Paco transcription, and he was asking about ideas for improvising. And I was like, well, let's start by voice leading these chords, because a lot of times
Mhm,
the improv might start with like an arpeggio of a chord, and then a scale run and things like that.
mhm,
So it came up like right away, and the fact that this was a good student, he was able to do it instantly, and then the concept made perfect sense to him.
mhm.
But for somebody that says, I don't want a voice lead, it's just like,
Well, and I don't want to sound like I'm making fun of it, because I'm not. Because I think sometimes when people say I don't want to do something, it's because it's really hard and they're
right,
afraid, they just get frustrated with it, and they're afraid, like, oh my gosh, there's this thing I can't do. What does that
right. And I
say about
think,
me?
right. And as teachers, if we can show them how it can be used, what is the application of this information? So again, that's where I think knowing the individual
Mhm.
student is really important as well.
Yeah.
Find an example in the music that they like, or the music that they play, or a song that they wrote. I had a student this past spring who was a songwriter, and that's all we did was just kind of work on his songs. And
Mhm.
so every lesson, it was just trying to show him concepts. Why don't you learn these concepts? Because look, you could do this in your song.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it was funny because he was a brilliant songwriter, but he was kind of one of those students that's like, why do I need to do this? But I feel
Yeah.
like in a small way I was able to kind of like push him in that direction. And
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for people to know too, you're not supposed to know everything about the guitar. Like, you'll never know everything. There's so many things that when I look at those proficiencies, I'm like, oh, I wish I was more familiar with this aspect of it. It just doesn't come up in a lot of the music I play. So when I want to go back to it, it does feel like I'm in the dark forest again, and it's okay. I mean, it's kind of supposed to be like that. And it is uncomfortable, which is also okay. I think that is a new idea for people when they come to music school. They feel like, oh, the guitar is my refuge, the guitar is my voice. It should always feel comfortable and free and beautiful. But in reality, it's always going to feel uncomfortable, and it's always going to feel like a challenge. And that can be some really hard days, like for all of us.
Right.
And so I think like that kind of impetus that people have, like, I hate these cycles, I don't want to do this, it's because it makes you feel uncomfortable. And honestly, it's supposed to,
Right.
because you're growing. And then, but when you move through that, as you move through that, you're going to learn all these beautiful things that will come into your playing in a really beautiful way. But I think it's important for people to come to terms with that idea that the discomfort doesn't go away, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think as a teacher, what I try to do is find that perfect balance between comfort and support,
Hmm.
and that feeling of not being comfortable, by pointing out things that maybe they're overlooking or haven't thought of. So, get people to feel good about what they're doing, and then bam, okay, now what about this? And then
Mm.
you know, and then give them that challenge and see if they're able to overcome those deficiencies, or look at things in a slightly different way that might help influence the end result.
Cheryl, how do you approach that idea of discomfort and approaching things that seem really challenging on the fretboard?
Wow, I don't that's a good question. I'd have to think about that. Oh, you mean with different students or with myself?
I guess both. I mean, just with that overall idea, I was going to ask Ian too, just with that, I think it's important for people to hear us talk about, honestly, like, that's just a reality of life on the guitar. I mean, I think sometimes with the proficiencies, you come up for the first time to all this data that you're unfamiliar with, and it feels wrong because you feel like you should know about your own instrument, and maybe it's like not important if you don't feel comfortable with it. But in reality, I think then you get to this point where you realize there's always going to be something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I always have a list. I mean, and it could be actually a real list of things, or just a list in my head of things that I can't do well and I want to do well. So that's what I'm work on in my technical parts of my practice time, and really slow, like total slow motion. And then maybe I take that and apply it to a tune so that I have a practical application. And I could be chipping away at that for a long time till it comes out even just a little bit cleaner or better or faster. But it's sort of like getting down into the weeds with it, slow motion. And so I mean, that's what I often suggest to my students is find those things that really intrigue you, but you can't really play them yet. There might be just a challenge to it, and just keep a running list of those things, because the list it never stops. I mean, it's not like you're done with the list, you know.
What about you, Ian?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same, like a lot of the same thing, like the metronome, like because it's so, I don't know, like when you're playing something that fits well on your hand, if you're like in a particular part of a tune, like personally, like I was trying to um blow over If I Were a Bell yesterday, and just something about starting on the G7, it just never seemed right to me. You know what I mean? It like something about those changes, it just didn't seem like when I'm actually doing it and trying to voice lead it, you know, the correct way, it just didn't really sit well with me. So I had to take it just really slow with the metronome. And like, I guess in terms of approaching it, like in bringing it up and then really nailing something, like if there's a passage or something that you have to start really slow and it's just like pulling teeth and it's very difficult, and like destroying your ego as you're not sounding good at all when you feel like you should sound a lot better, and then when you're ticking it up with the metronome and then all of a sudden you've got some fluency on it, it really feels good. But then of course then the next day it's something else, right?
Yeah, I mean, both of you kind of expressed a phrase that I use with students, which is practicing improvisation. And I always equate it with like a George Carlin type phrase, like jumbo shrimp or military intelligence or something. Practicing improvisation. Wait a minute, improvisation is supposed to be spontaneous. It's supposed to be play whatever I feel. But we obviously know that that's not the case, that it's just a lot of working out things and breaking it down and having strategies like you expressed, and that's a big part of what I try to encourage as well, taking things at slower tempos. I mean, today with that flamenco student, it was this progression where there's a harmonic minor chord that lasts like 2 beats. So it's like you can't just jump into that without setting it up. So I said, let's make it 8 measures and then break it down to 4 and 2 and then 1 and then 2 beats. So having that strategy. And I remember doing that once with the Mick Goodrick tune I was working on. That was like this crazy tune. And it was like summer band camp, and it had like 2 measures of all these like unrelated chords. I think the song was based on a tone row or something, a 12-tone row. And so I remember it was 2 measures per chord, and I remember recording it, so I had 2 minutes per chord, and then gradually brought it down to the actual song, So I think that's important in terms of understanding concepts, but then how to get to the place where you need to be, So
Yeah, I think that's really true.
can i
Patient,
can i make
go
it
ahead.
sorry, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
sure.
Yeah, no, please.
There's just a one connection that I want to make between what you're talking about right now and the teaching. And that is this, like, okay, I took your class and I had a shtick for certain ways of holding the guitar that I would teach to students.
Hmm.
And it was like a whole spiel about holding a sandwich, and you can't put your thumb. And then like for the pick, it's like, it's like you're playing thumb war, and then you put the pick, it was like a whole thing that I had.
Hmm.
And what I'm curious about is like, it's a lot like practicing improvisation where you have the licks, right? And I'm curious about like in terms of teaching, like what it feels like to like have so much of that vocabulary to where you really are improvising with with a student.
You mean in terms of the actual pedagogy, like the teaching?
Yeah, I mean just
Hmm.
like teaching, because I mean like you talk about, just breaking apart a simple thing like brushing your teeth. You really have to like have a system laid out ahead of time. But then all of a sudden, how do you know, like, both in terms of your own playing, but also the ability to improvise with a student and whatever might issues they might have.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, so much of that to me is just based on experience, just, having done it as often, having to react. And then, like I said at the very beginning, too, just kind of analyzing each lesson and how it went. I mean, there are definitely things I've said or done at the end of a lesson where I'm like, I could have done that differently. I think that's, I mean, the same way at the end of the gig where you think like, yeah, it went pretty good, except for that one tune. I actually did a gig last night, and I'm still thinking about this one tune. I just didn't count it off right, and it just, ah, you know, tune I really like to play and know well. And I just, because I didn't count it off right, it just didn't go the way that I had hoped. But, uh, but you just learn from that. Next time I'll be much more focused and on, all right, it's a fast tempo, there's a bass pedal. Let's get this right before we start playing. So it's just you learn from those things. But what I realized, I only learn from those things if I really do analyze it. Again, the Monday morning quarterback thing, I use that analogy all the time. It's like, Sunday you play the game, Monday you go and you watch film, and you look at all the things that didn't go well, as well as the things that did go well. And then you try to learn from those. So that's kind of the way that I've tried to improve my teaching is, and certainly I do that with my playing as well.
That's great. Cheryl, what's on your mind as we're kind of coming to the end of the coffee run today?
This was really great, David. You shared so many just great things about teaching and learning. And you answered my question about the right hand technique in flamenco
And my nails.
and the nails. Yeah, I mean, thank you I mean, there's a lot of stuff here that I'm going to go back and listen to and think about. And just, yeah, also just what you were saying there, also about just by doing it, you get better. You can only get good at things that you do. So whether that's improvising or, playing the pieces or being a teacher, the
Right.
more you do it, you get better. And your sight reading. People say, I'm a terrible sight reader. Like, well, how many times, what did you practice today yet? No. Like, well, every
Right,
day.
right, right.
You only get good at what you do. So
Right, right. And inspiration is such a big part of it too. I mean, I feel so fortunate being a part of this department because I'm inspired by the amazing faculty like yourselves and the students. They just make me want to be a better teacher because they're so hungry to learn. I can't believe like these first semester students and the way they come in. I mean, maybe that'll get you know tempered a little bit as they get closer to midterms and finals. But right now they're just like a sponge, ready to soak up anything that you give them, and that's inspiring. And it's like, okay, yeah, I'll give you whatever I can, to make you not only a better guitar player, but a better student and a better person, in the big picture of things.
That's really good. That's a really good thought. Um, Ian, do you have anything that's left on your mind here?
No, I just really appreciate the way that, you talk about it. Almost sounds like, your pedagogy and your organizational skills and practice throughout your instrument is exactly how you approach teaching. And I think that's just really
Yeah, yeah, I didn't talk about like the 8 string and the 10 string, but I mean there aren't a lot of like 8 string guitar methods or 10 string guitar transcriptions. So in deciding to kind of tackle those instruments, I kind of had to teach myself. So that organization helped, where I would create exercises for the 10 string or I would transcribe something for the 8 string. Take the Bach cello suites and let's learn those on the 8 string because that's going to help me not only learn the mechanics of playing this instrument, but teach me to be a better musician as I try to interpret this music. So I try to be as organized as possible in those types of approaches, and hopefully that carries over into the way that I teach as well.
That's beautiful. Um, Thanks, David, for being with
Yeah,
us
thanks for
today.
inviting me. I didn't.
Yeah.
You never asked what was in the cup. I didn't get to talk about
Oh, you
the fact
didn't.
that I'm a tea drinker.
You did mention that you had switched to tea.
Yes,
But do
yes.
you want to tell them what kind of tea you got in there?
Sure, sure. So I do my own blend. I have
Oh,
my own blend. Yeah, I have a whole little setup. It's kind of off limits to everyone in the family. Don't get near my tea corner. So I have a Breville tea maker, and I do my own blend. It's Earl Grey, English breakfast, and Scottish breakfast. So
it's really funny because we keep saying that the way people approach their coffee and the way people approach their tea says a lot about the way they approach their music. And the fact that you have taken three
it was
different
only
types
two
of
for a
tea.
long, long time, and then
You
I did
see?
a gig a couple summers ago. I played in Islesboro, Maine, this beautiful, beautiful like island right off the coast of mid-coast Maine, and there's no hotels or anything on the island, so we stayed with a host family overnight, and she served a blend with Scottish breakfast tea, and I had never tried Scottish breakfast tea before, and it was so good. So I instantly changed my drinking habits. So now it's English, Scottish, and Earl Grey.
See, everyone, if you reflect on everything David has taught us today about teaching and stylistic development and practicing and performing, it makes a lot of sense that this plays into the way you approach your tea.
Yeah, and
So
we can
thank
all
you.
change. We don't have to be stuck. I remember taking my son to a diner in Manchester, New Hampshire once when he was really little, and we sat at the counter, and the waitress came by and looked at this customer and said, "Hey, Jim, you want the usual?" And Wesley looked at me and he said, "Dad, what's the usual?" And it's like, then he became a usual kind of person after that. So now, but I think it's good to change. I think it's good, and that's something I've tried to do. With my music and with my teaching is just be open to change and try new things, and I like that challenge. I mean, I feel like you know at every possible turn I've tried to take on a new challenge. It's like, oh, I like the mandolin. I think I'm going to study the mandolin. And actually yesterday I took a ukulele lesson. So yeah, I had Carissa Hoffman. She just graduated, and she was in my
Yeah.
teaching class. And I said, I really want a ukulele lesson. So I had a
And her
ukulele lesson.
teacher, her
I know
teacher
she's
was your student,
was Karen. That's such
Karen
a
Hogue.
cool like circle of life kind of thing. Yeah,
I
her
know.
teacher was Karen, and Karen was my teacher when she was I mean, my student when she was at Berkeley.
That is so cool.
And
Oh, and
she taught National Guitar Workshop. It's like all this,
that's awesome.
yeah,
I want to
small world.
mention before we sign off that you mentioned Toki earlier, and that's
Hmm.
Toki Wright for all of you who are listening. He's the chair of pro music, and so you can look up Toki and that great major that David teaches the class for. So
Yeah, and I should have videotaped because then you could have had Toki Wright teaching how to brush your teeth.
well, you can ask him now when you go in for your meeting about pro music because he's got it down. He's got the lesson plan down. That's pretty good.
No,
Um,
he's great, and he's
he's
done
great.
some amazing stuff for the pro music department, which I also teach in.
Mm,
So,
cool. Well,
mhm.
thank you, David. Cheers to you.
Thank you,
Coffee to
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Cheryl.
Cheryl. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, David. And we'll be with you next time on the next Coffee Talk. Bye, everybody.